Hello and welcome to another episode of the Back Bone Zone. Stoked to get another one back with some regularity. Very trying times sometimes to make sure that we're pretty regular with this thing. I actually had a podcast lined up with the one and only Will Kerr, which we have to push back a little bit. More on that later. The first thing that I actually want to just touch on a couple of cool things or interesting things with BMX in general is I saw just last night that Dennis Anderson has left Demolitions on Odyssey, which is insane to me to think, that guy's probably been on Demolition for who knows, over 10 years or something. So for him to be on Odyssey is pretty huge change, and no doubt we will see some more mind-blowing riding from Dennis. He never fails to disappoint and is one of my all-time favourite riders, that's for sure, him and Brian Foster. The other thing is too, I saw Jason Watts is coming back into Australia, pretty long stint in the States and then through Europe and things like that. So it'll be cool to have him back in Oz, and he'll be coming through Canberra, no doubt. And then we've got the ACT Jam in October, so October 6, 7, 8. If you haven't been paying attention, we've got to save the date. Save that date. If you order something, we'll send you out a postcard so you can chuck it on the fridge. But organising that now, so that's pretty exciting. The big thing news-wise, and I guess the reason why the Will Kerr podcast isn't up today is because we went to Young to record that podcast and also get a few more clips and photos and whatnot, and just have a bit of a time out there. And unfortunately, my business partner and obviously best mate, Riss, broke his foot. So that sucks for him. It was tough to watch, but I mean, Riss handled it like a champion. It is what it is. Crashing and hurting yourself kind of comes with the territory of bike riding or BMX riding. And that was what I wanted to talk about today, because I took him to the hospital, and it was just a regional hospital and whatnot, so I guess maybe cycling injuries, who knows, don't come in as often or something. But it was just so interesting to me to hear basically how much crap they were giving Riss for falling off a bike and breaking his foot. And it's something that I have personally dealt with when I go to the hospital, and obviously Riss has dealt with it before. This is, Riss doesn't often have injuries that require him to go to the hospital, but there's many of us that no doubt have, and it always seems to be just from my circle of friends, when I'm in there with people or I'm in there myself, he always kind of get looked at as if, well, why did you do such a stupid thing like ride a BMX bike and now you've hurt yourself? And man, I couldn't believe the amount of shit that they were just giving Riss for essentially, he hurt himself, but it was more the fact that he hurt himself riding bikes, and I guess specifically BMX bikes. They were just saying things like, why don't you give that up? And, oh, that's so silly, and all that type of stuff. And I understand from their perspective, they don't want to, maybe they do want to fix people. I guess that's why they're in the healthcare industry. They're in there as a emergency department doctor or nurse or whatnot, but I was just surprised because it seems to be a reoccurring theme with BMX riders going into hospitals, and then the overwhelming response from the people that work in the hospitals is, why would you be doing something silly like that? A lot of it's said in jest, but I don't get it. The thing that or the thing that both Riss and I said to each other when we were in there, and we have said in the past, is that at least you're in hospital because unfortunately something went wrong, and you never expect things to go wrong when you're riding. You're obviously expecting the best outcome that you can when you're riding, which is obviously have a good time, get home safe and all that type of stuff. But the things went wrong, but you would much prefer for things to go wrong doing something you love than, just tripping down the stairs and breaking your leg. Or, tripping down the stairs and breaking your foot in Riss's instance. Or something even worse than that would be like going out and getting drunk or whatever, and then falling over and breaking your foot or whatever it might be. I actually had, after that discussion, or after, listening to those doctors and nurses with Riss, I went home and actually looked it up. So I'm going to share it with you now, because I think it's kind of interesting. The big thing, so we've got here, is that I've got the sports injury hospitalizations in Australia for 2019 to 2020. So that is the website. It's off the AIHW website, which is don't know, Australian. Let me have a look and see what that stands for. Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. So just so you know, government department. They put out a report. They don't put out reports, I don't think, in the year that it's happening, but they've done a report for 2019 and 2020, which is obviously reflective of, or fairly reflective of, current years as well as years past. And I just was looking at the rate of hospitalizations in terms of sports, because the thing that stands out to me with this whole conversation is that, and why it's looked down upon in hospitals, is because I would be interested to know, because I don't know, but I am assuming that if you went in and said that you'd broken your foot or shoulder playing football or rugby league, AFL, whatever it is, or if you hurt yourself doing gymnastics or something along those lines, I've got a pretty strong feeling that you wouldn't be met with that same sort of like, oh, well, that was stupid for riding BMX bikes response. I feel like this is where we're at with BMX at the moment, is that we still get looked down upon as, being these adults that should have grown up, and what are you still doing riding a bike, because that's silly and it's kids thing and whatever else. But we got to realize, or people need to realize, that any endeavor that you take up is, just as worth it for you as football is to someone else. If you can get enjoyment out of, if you are obsessed with shuffling cards, and that is something that you are very passionate about, and you hurt yourself shuffling cards, for example, well, to you, I'm sure that would be worth it. And of course, it's not something that you want to have happen, but it's important to have a passion and something that gets you off the couch and doing stuff, because I don't really understand that thought process. You know, would a person be better off doing nothing that risks their health? And I mean, like, you just sit on the couch, you do nothing, you have no passion that could compromise your health, and therefore risk missing essentially what can bring huge fulfillment and enjoyment to your life. And especially since it's your own choice to make, you know, should we just all be not doing anything, and therefore, you know, maybe BMX hospitalizations would go down because of that. But you could argue that hospitalizations could go up because of, you know, who knows, mental health issues and things like that. I think, you know, it's a bit of a tangent, but it's just interesting to think that other sports are more well accepted than BMX. But anyway, back to this report. A bit of a tangent there, but back to the report. I looked up, so in 2019 to 2020, 52,300 sports injuries led to a hospital stay in Australia. And then the report goes on to describe the people that were hospitalised and the types of injuries they sustained, and of course the sports they were playing. So one thing they did find, which was that injuries from solo sports such as cycling rose after COVID-19 restrictions began, which is no surprise considering that team sports, you know, were pretty much all but banned in COVID-19. But anyhow, we'll go down here because what I thought was interesting was that they did have the type of injury sustained. So fractures, obviously the most common injury in sporting hospitalizations. So just over half of all sports injury hospitalizations was from fractures, so 51%, and then soft tissue injury after that. And then it goes down the list, other unspecified injuries: open wound, infracranial injury, dislocation, superficial injury, internal organ or vessel. So obviously stuff gets pretty gnarly, but this was pretty interesting. Just they have a subheading called Concussions, and it says that most hospitalized intracranial injuries inside the skull in sports were, which was 80%, were concussions. So 80% of head injuries were concussions. And this is particular. I'll go on and I'll explain why this is interesting to me. So concussions are usually caused by a knock to the head, but can also be caused by a blow to the body. There has been a growing concern in Australia and internationally about the incidence of sport-related concussion and potential health ramifications for athletes. While short-term symptoms are reversible, a single knock to the head can have serious consequences later in life. There were over 2,300 cases of hospitalized concussion caused by sports in 2019 to 2020. And of these, 1,600 were male and 700 were female. And this is the interesting part: about 730 occurred while playing some form of football, and about 440 occurred while cycling. So we're talking almost double, about 60, almost double would be that is, we're talking probably maybe 33% to like 66%, 66% being football and 33% being cycling, kind of close to those numbers, but yeah, almost double, 730 while playing some form of football, and then 440 from cycling. Now, obviously, football and cycling, that would mean that cycling could be road cycling, mountain biking, and BMX. And then some form of football could be any form of football. But generally speaking, concussions happen almost 2-to-1 in football to cycling. Now, I would be very interested to know, and I would love to hear if there's anyone who's a emergency department nurse or a paramedic or something like that could speak on the response that's given from those nurses and doctors to the player, and if it's a negative, as in why are you playing football? Don't you know that leads to doing this? Compared to BMXers, where I have had that experience for me personally, and I've been in the room when other people have been kind of mocked and laughed at for hurting themselves or getting concussion while they have been riding BMX. So again, I guess I just want to circle back to the idea that no one wants to get injured. And I don't think it's, I'm not trying to trivialize getting injured at all. I certainly think that getting injured is, a serious thing, and that I would hate to see my mate getting hurt from football, just like I would hate to see them get hurt from BMX. But I certainly don't think that either or one is, more justified than the other. Just because you're playing football and you hurt yourself doesn't mean that that's any more justified than someone hurting themselves from BMX, because while you might be competing in football, you essentially play it because you love it, and you're willing to, I guess, subconsciously, you might not think about it in a conscious way or not, but there's associated risks playing football, and you're probably willing to take those risks. And to be honest, with football, say for example rugby league or AFL, or to be honest even soccer, if you were to hurt yourself from football, and let's just go with this concussion example, it's generally not because you just dove into the ground yourself. It's actually because someone else has caused that head trauma to you. So take it or leave it with how you interpret that. But with BMX, obviously things can go wrong, but you are in control of the risk that you take, and if something goes wrong, then you are responsible for that risk. You can be playing football and you can be doing totally well, and then someone dumps you on your head in a tackle, and that's the reason why you are now have a concussion or head trauma or even worse. So you weren't responsible for your own destiny. Something to think about. It's interesting. I will say though, just going on with this, they're talking about falls and things like that. One thing that I will point out, just to be full transparency, they do talk about sports participation and the rates of injury in sports. And they do talk about the most popular recreational activities was walking, and then going to the gym and fitness being far and away the most popular. Walking with 9.5 million participants, and fitness and gym with 8.3 million respectively. So there is, when we're talking about, and here it is here, cycling has the highest number of hospitalizations. So the sports with the most injury hospitalization in 2019 to 2020 were those that involved wheels and various types of football. So if you were to look at this, it says cycling saw around 8,000 reported injury hospitalization, followed by motorsports, roller sports, blah, blah, blah. But together, the three so we're talking about all cycling reported 8,000 injury hospitalization. So when you read the headline or the heading, the subheading is cycling has the highest number of hospitalizations, you're obviously thinking, well, I guess like cycling does, attribute to the most hospitalizations. But then if you were to look at underneath that subheading, it actually says together the three main specified types of football, which is Australian rules, rugby and soccer, attributed 8,700 hospitalizations. So, and as well as that, however, because generic terms are often used for any or all of the football codes, a relatively large number of injury hospitalizations are attributed to other and unspecified football, which is 2,100 cases. So I think that's interesting to note, because if you were to say that 8,000 injury hospitalizations came from cycling, and then you were to break cycling down into its subcategories, so we're talking road cycling, mountain biking, obviously BMX, then you could see obviously a further divide in that number, and it would be made smaller. And then if you were to look at, so there's three specified types of cycling to make that 8,000, whereas football, those three specified types of football make 8,700. So while cycling as a one discipline thing has more hospitalizations, if you were to count the three football codes, then all of a sudden that has more hospitalizations. So I think that's really interesting to note, because I would never consider myself to be a road cyclist, so I think it's fair to look at that 8,000 number as something that's smaller, and that you would never know whether road cycling attributes to 80% of that number or something like that, or it might be to 10% of that number. Maybe BMXers fall a hell of a lot. But so to follow on from that, I also just looked at it's actually kind of interesting, just to bring it back to my point as well. Alcohol is actually one of the biggest reasons why. It's actually much more of a reason why people hurt themselves. Well, not hurt themselves, but end up in hospital. So if we look at hospitalizations for alcohol, and if you can remember what it was 2019 and 2020 in sports injuries, it was 52,000. So in 2019, 2020, for hospitalizations for alcohol, it was 74,511. So, I mean, you could potentially make the argument that maybe that would be justified for nurses and doctors to say, or to mock those people. I wouldn't say that it's justified at all, but I'm just I'm just a little bit sick over the years of hearing that same sort of response to bike riders, where it's like, well, why are you doing that? That's so stupid. How old are you again? Whereas I'm sure that they probably don't even ask that question. How old are you again? Oh, you're 40 and you're still drinking and you've ended up in hospital? Jeez. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a frustrating topic, I think, for me. And obviously for Riss too, he's an older rider and he doesn't spend barely any time, in hospital for the decades that he's been riding. And to be treated like that, as if you're a stupid, as if you should know better. I was going to say stupid little kid, but, as if you should know better. I think that BMX needs to be taken a little bit more seriously. Like, it's just as important for people to do that. And if they get injured, like I said, we wouldn't be judged so harshly if we were playing football or soccer or any other sport like that. And hell, BMX is in the Olympics. So, I was training for the Olympics and I ended up breaking my foot. I wonder if that's looked down upon. Anyway, so what do you do about an injury? Would probably be something that you are asking yourself. At least that's something that I have had to deal with myself. I've had, like I said in the last podcast, many serious injuries that have taken me out. It's definitely a really good time to reflect on basically what else makes you happy that's not BMX, and it's also a good way to really clarify what it is that you like about BMX. Like for me, I found it quite fun to, I always got back into drawing quite a lot when I was injured, because it gave me that in the zone feeling that BMX does. And the cool thing is that I can still sort of align that passion or pastime, whatever you want to call it, with BMX. So, I draw, whether it's t-shirt designs or logos or whatever else. So that's really fun. And another thing that I've done over the last almost 10 years is just to make sure that I start to fortify myself by looking at how I can get stronger or be healthier from nutrition or things like that. So getting hurt definitely does suck, because one day you're riding and the next time you're getting told you've got 3 or 6 months off. But these things happen, and I do think that for the most part, like if you're an older rider and you're scared of getting injured, I've never really seen getting injured as something that has affected me mentally. I think because you don't almost realize how much you miss something until you're told that you can't do it. And from there, you are able to reignite a real drive, and it helps you to overcome that barrier of not having ridden for 3 or 6 months or whatever it is. So you'll be surprised. Not that I'm saying go out and hurt yourself by any means, but don't be so worried about hurting yourself. Unless your career depends on you being able-bodied. I think that these things, like I said, hospitalizations and things like that can happen more from drinking than they can from riding BMX. So I think that as long as you're in control of your own destiny, you can ride to the level that you feel comfortable and safe at, and then that way you're less likely to end up in hospital as well. And it's just something that I feel like is interesting, and I'd really like to sort of know what people's thoughts are about it, because I, for one, do not like being judged in such a negative way like that in the hospital, and I'm sure other riders have felt that. But let's spread the message, let people know that BMX is a serious thing and is no less warranted for being fixed, or to not be judged so negatively when you're in hospital. And anyway, the big get well wishes to Riss. He'll be, I'm sure it sucks now, but this will feel like a distant memory pretty soon. And hopefully he, gets through it all without many complications and things like that. So well wishes to Riss, and get ready for the next one. Thanks for listening. See you later.